I have a couple. It seems that this is almost sort of like a scattered approach to a very important problem. You know, you pick 120 school sites out of how many are there in the state?
So the school site is a representative of the local education agency. So there are 1,000 basically school districts and about 1,000 charter schools, so 2,000 approximately.
And so you pick, what is it, less than 1%? And if they're not in compliance, you try to work with them to become in compliance. Has there been a thought about maybe doing sort of a mass training? So instead of starting from the backside, you actually offer every school or every school district the opportunity to get training so that you can identify who the Title IX officer is, the compliance officer, and have a training program so that we know and they all get the same training rather than try to find them at the back end. In other words, instead of, I wonder who it is, how about a program and then also asking in the federal level, because this is, it's kind of like if I were a principal or a school board and I had a lot of priorities where there might be some more significant consequences, this is not likely to be the #1 priority, and in fact, I suspect in many instances, it's very short shrift. I'm wondering if you have some suggestions on how we could flip that so that we don't have to worry by doing a shotgun approach to this. We can basically do the training, and then complaints that come will be from people who know that there is recourse. They'll know who the officer is, and frankly, I suspect if we have Title IX officers who are properly trained in schools who believe they have to take this seriously, it would almost in and of itself, you know, correct 90% of the problems.
So I think that is a fabulous idea. Unfortunately, the department does not receive dollars to do this work from the federal government. So we rely upon state resources essentially, and that's just the way it is, and that's the law. We rely on state dollars to do this work. At this point, the department for the last few years has been having a problem with its general fund, and we haven't been able to do many trainings. So we would be happy to work with the committee to figure out a way to do that, to create a proactive training and the resources necessary.
And from the federal perspective?
Yeah, I'm sure we're seeing the same thing. What we see most commonly is other administrators, like the Director of Pupil Services, or sometimes HR, or sometimes another administrator who has tons of other responsibilities is assigned to be the Title IX coordinator or the Section 504 coordinator and so forth. And as you said, they don't have the time and the resources to train themselves. We do trainings for school districts on these subjects when we have the opportunity. For us, it's a question of resources as well, finding the location and so forth, and paying to set up a conference. Again, we don't have money dedicated to that any longer either. For example, we did a conference in Los Angeles County a few years ago where we invited all school districts in Los Angeles County, which is, I can't tell you the number off my head, but a fair number of school districts. It's a lot of them. And the training was on how to conduct harassment investigations and the requirements of Title IX. So I enjoy doing those kinds of things myself. I would personally love it if we could do more of those. And again, it's just a question of resources. I agree
How many
with you.
people showed up? How many schools were represented?
I believe about 40 school districts.
And, okay. So if you were holding these hearings, is there some way we could require the school districts to send someone to these? I mean, this is an opportunity to learn about what they're supposed to be doing in the first place. Is there some incentivizing that you see that we could be doing to get the schools there?
So generally speaking, we find when we offer trainings, schools are very proactive to attend those trainings and really want to. So I think it's just the resources to have the ability to put those trainings on. And I think, you know, the department has partnered with OCR on other topics, and I think we'd be happy to do so again.
And we do happen to have our appropriations chair here, so I'm hoping he's listening carefully. Senator Wachowski.
I guess the question I have is, it seems there's a focus on the title of the person, identifying the person that's there, and I wanted to turn towards the programming because, if I'm concerned that there's the anti-bullying program is working and all the students know that you can't bully, not that it's Mrs. McGillicuddy that's the person who's got the title that's in charge, and then how are we doing on the programming? Because like here, I don't know who's in charge of HR, but I know that somebody is in charge, and if I need that, then I can get that. Can you touch on that part of our role?
So we consider bullying and harassment, it's essentially, for all practical purposes, the same thing. And there's been a huge amount of it lately. There's been a lot of attention in the press over the last several years, and I think that it's been heightened for schools to do something. But again, it's a training factor. It's having the ability to get folks in to hear some of those things. And some districts have been able to put those things on and really utilize, and some are still struggling with it. So I think it's training. I think districts want to do the right thing. They just don't always know exactly the steps to follow.
When we find a compliance issue in a sexual harassment or racial harassment, disability-based harassment, which we're also seeing complaint, one of the things that we do routinely require in our resolution agreements is training for administrators, training for site staff, and training for students on anti-bullying and sexual harassment. But the Title IX regulations don't affirmatively require that kind of training. We do ask for it as a remedy when we see a problem.
Great. Thank you. Well, we could continue this conversation, and perhaps we will. Senator Lara, my apologies.
Thank you. I wanted to talk, and I don't know if you guys can answer this. I know we've seen a lot of a growth in bullying and violence towards cheerleaders. Or do the cheerleaders actually, is that considered a sport, and are they covered under Title IX?
Competitive, it's kind of a complicated question, and we might have folks in the audience that can answer it better than I. Cheerleading can be a competitive sport. Are you talking about harassment complaints or?
Well, I'm just curious to see if are they covered under the Title IX harassment reports? Are they protected? Is there guidelines?
Every student, regardless of sex or sexual orientation, is protected by Title IX. There are not specific requirements with respect to harassment for cheerleaders. I know there's been a very serious case recently involving a male student who was a cheerleader.
Right.
Yeah.
And so, to be clear, is cheerleading, you said competitive cheerleading, but is cheerleading not considered protected under Title IX?
As a sport,
Correct.
Subject to the athletics requirements, it depends on how it's organized at the school. And unfortunately, I can't give you too many more criteria than that.
So if we were to work on something that would, because I know 35 states consider cheerleading already a sport, regardless of its competition or not. I think Texas and New York just did it last year. We're going to be working on something similar. Would that help in terms of ensuring that these men and women are protected under some sort of Title IX, or?
I think I can help with this. There are two issues here. One is any student is protected under Title IX. The question of whether or not for the purpose of athletics,
Correct.
whether cheerleading is considered a sport for which you have to provide the same opportunities for cheerleading that you provide for other sports in terms of availability, making it easy for them.
That is why you're the chairwoman of this committee.
Well, and I know as someone who was never a cheerleader, but cheerleading today is a dangerous sport. And I do think we are going to move in that direction, and that may, that there are a lot of significant issues associated with it, but in terms of being protected, all students are protected from sexual harassment under Title IX and our state ed code. Whether or not we can then start talking about whether, that fills, if you will, some of the slots that we have in boys' sports, because today we don't technically call cheerleading a sport, then other girls' activities have got to be equalized. If we conclude cheerleading, and I'm sure there'll be discussion about cheerleading can be very acrobatic and really competitive as compared to some other aspects, and I think that might be part of that discussion. If it truly is a competitive activity, should we call it a sport for Title IX purposes of equal opportunity? that's one issue. But in terms of being a cheerleader and being harassed, you could just be a student walking down the hallway, and if you're being harassed in violation of the provisions of Title IX, you're eligible.
For the record, I was a cheerleader.
I knew
Just wanted
that,
to know.
yeah.
Yeah,
Great
because-
sport, cheerleading.
It's a great sport.
Just really briefly, and looking at interests and abilities and the opportunities for boys and girls at the high school level, if you're looking at the number of opportunities overall, not sport for sport. So if cheerleading is organized as a competitive sport, then that gives opportunity, that's considered to provide opportunities for the students, athletic opportunities for the students that participate in it.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. We really appreciate it, and I've been told I am so totally out of whack on time. So if the next group, school-sponsored athletics, the next group is Kim Turner, staff attorney for Fair Play for Girls in Sports. Isabel Brennis, I believe, principal at Chino Hills High School. And Roger Blake, the executive director of the California Interscholastic Federation. Very interested in hearing how things are, if you will, on the ground. And if you could also help us out by giving us some suggestions here, the three questions that I posed earlier, again, aside from potentially losing federal funding or being subject to litigation that nobody wants to have happen, what enforcement mechanisms do you feel exist or should exist to give you incentives to comply, and how can schools achieve greater Title IX compliance, and what assistance could we provide as a legislature to help you meet those requirements? And if we could have Kim Turner please start. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Senator Jackson. Thank you, members of the committee. Good afternoon. My name is Kim Turner, staff attorney with Fair Play for Girls in Sports, a project of the nonprofit Legal Aid Society Employment Law Center in San Francisco. For over 10 years at Fair Play, we have focused on increasing sports opportunities and improving the quality of those opportunities so that girls may experience equity in athletics in public schools and parks and recreation. We do this at Fair Play through education, training, and, if needed, litigation. Fair Play is particularly focused on assisting girls in grades K through 12 in low-income areas and girls of color, who too often statistically have the fewest sports opportunities. Playing sports, as you all know, is about so much more than fun and games. Not only does participation improve health, sports involvement is a pathway to lifelong success. Girls who play sports are more likely to graduate from high school and enter college. Girls who play sports have lower rates of depression and are less likely to become pregnant at a young age. But playing sports is also a route to economic security and success, which is why my organization, the Employment Law Center, is invested in athletic equity for girls. A Princeton economist, Betsy Stevenson, reports in a recent study, Title IX and the Evolution of High School Sports, that girls who play sports in high school make 7% higher wages 15 years later in life. 7%. So another study by mutual fund company Oppenheimer revealed that 82% of women in executive level jobs played organized sports in middle school, high school, or post-secondary school. So the linkage is clear between sports and lifelong success. Title IX requires equity in the number of athletic opportunities afforded to girls and boys, meaning the actual number of girls playing sports, not just opportunities or slots offered, and requires equity in the benefits and treatment of those female students receiving uniforms, coaching, and facilities and the like. Yet, even nearly 43 years after Title IX's passage, we at Fair Play all too often find individuals who have never heard of Title IX, do not understand how the law works, and admittedly it can be complicated, or they are ignoring their obligations under the law. Now, I want to tell you a quick story about a group of dedicated, serious female athletes, softball players, in a low-income part of California. These girls dealt each day with a rundown, dusty, littered softball diamond trampled by students using their field for PE. These girls lacked an outfield fence, proper dugout space, and barely had necessary equipment and storage space. Just a few yards away, I ask you to picture, on the same exact school campus, these girls saw the boys' baseball diamond with cinder block dugouts, Much like those you find in a Major League Baseball field, palm trees lining the green, watered field, and plenty of equipment for the entire boys' baseball program. Now, too often we hear, that is the way it is everywhere, unequal, and it's always been like that. How can these girls, these students, feel like equal peers to males on campus when each day after school they are treated as a second class? That is where Title IX comes in. In 2007, these brave girls, with no other means to make change, had to file a Title IX lawsuit with the help of Fair Play, my organization, because the law was their only means of making change for equality at the school. Thankfully, a trial court found and an appeals court confirmed in September of last year that across the board, these softball players and other female athletes throughout the school were not being treated equally under Title IX. Please note, I have circulated photos to the members and members of the audience, pictures of the boys and girls fields, so you can see the differences in quality, as well as pictures of the old dugout for girls with just a chain link fence, and the new dugout that was built as a result of the lawsuit on the right-hand side, which is now finally equal to the boys. Now, thankfully, wielding Title IX, the girls were able to demand changes, and now, today, they are playing this very month, as softball season begins, on a well-conditioned, dedicated field with cinder block dugouts akin to the boys' baseball field. But it took years of complaints by the girls and ultimately a lawsuit for equity to take hold. We hope that schools across the state and country will take note of this case, Ollier v. Sweetwater, and address inequities proactively without the need for litigation. We at Fair Play hear from girls, their parents and guardians, coaches, and community members all the time about inequities, such as low numbers of opportunities for girls at schools where they want to play and they don't have teams to play on, or where boys are getting better facilities, more convenient practice and game times, more experienced coaches, and better publicity for sporting events, among other complaints. Title IX addresses all of these issues. It is now a matter of learning about and complying with the law today, not tomorrow. Now, finally, I want to share a couple of common queries we get at Fair Play, and hopefully we'll address Senator Lara's question. First, how does fundraising work? And what if a boys' team gets a big donation? This is a question we get all the time about booster clubs and fundraising. Now, I ask you to imagine if Bill Gates' son went to your local public school, and Bill, out of the kindness of his heart, decided to give new computers to all of the boys, but not to the girls. Would we stand for this? No. Title IX requires donations, booster clubs, and fundraising to be closely overseen by the school to ensure that girls and boys are generally equally benefiting academically and athletically. Now, second, does cheerleading count? We get this question all the time. Cheerleading is a popular and exciting activity. In fact, my college roommate was a cheerleader. But it is not considered a sport by Title IX standards. Now, this is because cheerleaders, sideline cheer I'm referring to, are not engaged in usually regular competition with other schools as required by the law. So if they have regular games against other cheerleading squads and regular competition, that would count. Unfortunately, as the law stands now, and as the schools run these programs, they're not competitive opportunities and don't count toward a school's compliance. Third, what about sports programs run through local park and recreation departments for boys and girls that are not related to schools? These programs at the local park and rec are covered by a separate California law, the first of its kind in the country and one of only 2 laws of its kind across the nation, AB 2404, the Fair Play and Community Sports Act. Very few people know about it. It was passed over 10 years ago. So, under this law, AB 2404, if a local Pop Warner football league has certain amenities and privileges, comparable girls' programs like AYSO soccer, a very popular girls' sport, should have generally the same. And we're hoping to raise awareness of this law and enforcement. We know that kids get their first exposure to sports often at the local park and recreation department, and we know that equality must be established right from the start. Now, finally, I wish to close with the words of Veronica Ollier, our lead plaintiff in the case I earlier noted. Playing softball has helped me in school. If I didn't play sports, I'm not sure that I would have the drive to stay in school and pursue a career. Playing softball helps me to set my priorities, not only for myself, but for my team. Thank you very much. I'm happy to take any questions. And Fair Play can be reached in a number of ways. Please find our contact information online and in this brochure that I'm circulating. Fair Play for Girls in Sports. We do believe that training is particularly important, and we hope that we can help with that effort to make sure communities across the state understand Title IX and start completely enforcing it and working with us.
Thank you very much. And I would bet if we asked all of the women members of the legislature if they competed in sports as young women, you'd find a very large, very high percentage who have. And I think that speaks certainly closely to us. And I appreciate your comments and your efforts. And now, Isabel Brennis, did I pronounce that properly?
Yes, you did.
Principal at Chino Hills High School. Thank you so much for coming.
Good afternoon, and thank you for having me here today. I hope, I appreciate your time, and I appreciate this opportunity to come and speak to you and shed some light on some of the things that we have to grapple with at the site. At the end of this written speech that I've created, I hope that you will have a better understanding of what the obstacles are that we face on a daily basis, how Title I works in practice on that day-to-day level, and that you're just enlightened as to how things work at that secondary level. So in order to comply with Title IX, the site must ensure the following, and it's a multi-step process. If you're looking at what I have here, I have numbers, and I have underneath the numbers the bullets. So it is quite in-depth, and it's when I'm done, I think you will definitely have some questions. But one of the things that we must first do is determine the athletic interests and abilities to students by non-discriminatory methods. Although the methods are of our choosing, we must ensure and take into account some of the following. We must take into account the nationally increasing levels of women's interests and abilities. We must also ensure the methods of determining interest and ability are not a disadvantage to the members of the underrepresented sex. We must also ensure the methods of determining ability to take into account team performance records. And lastly, we must ensure the methods are responsive to the expressed interest of students capable of this sport that they desire to compete in. In addition to that, we need to establish and implement a broad range of indicators to assess whether there is an unmet athletic interest amongst our students on our campus. So how do we do that? Some of the things that we do is we create a log in which students who come forth with requests for a particular sport, it's indicated on there. We create another log in which requests for the elevation of that existing club or sport gets put on a survey that at our site we've decided that's the method that we're going to be using as a survey. When creating that survey, we must look at the content of the survey, we must look at the target population, we must look at the responses, the rates, as well as the treatment of the response. We need to look at the fact that it's confidential, and we also need to look at the frequency in which we conduct the survey. Some of the other things that we would also do in establishing and assessing whether there is an unmet athletic need or desire, we would interview students and coaches and administrators to see if there is a sport that they're interested in. Additionally, we need to assess whether there is sufficient ability among interested students to sustain a team. And some of the things that we do is we will analyze the athletic experience and accomplishments. We will look at the opinions of the coaches and seek the opinions of athletes regarding whether they are indeed interested in this potential team and is it sustainable. And if the team has previously competed at the club or intramural level, whether the competitive experience of the team indicates that it has the potential to, again, sustain. So we're also interested in desire, but also sustainability. We also look into the frequency in which these assessments are done, in other words, the surveys. We look at the degree of which the previous assessment captured the interests and abilities of the school students' interests. We look at such things as a change in demographics or student population. For our site in particular, we do it on an annual basis. We don't wait for things to change. It's just something that we're trying to get ahead of. We're a large school. We are known as a school that has a very strong athletic program, and because of that, we just have decided we're going to do it on an annual basis. We also need to establish effective ongoing procedures for collecting, maintaining, and analyzing information. It needs, policies and procedures need to be easily understood to everybody that comes on our campus. All students, if they have an interest, they need to know who is our site coordinator, who do they go to if they are interested, what are the procedures. We also question, do we have a wide dissemination of the policies and procedures in place? And if not, what could we do, especially with the advances of technology? There's things that our school site has that other schools may not have. And so we look at all avenues. How are we publicizing and letting students know if they're interested in a sport that currently does not exist, that what's the policy and procedure for that? We also look at and determine if there is a sufficient number of students to sustain a team. Again, we look at the minimum number of participants needed. We look and note the size of the team and where the competitive range is within our area. And all those things put together assists us at the school site with being able to provide an additional sport if there is indeed an interest. Now, in order to do everything that I've just said, it takes a team. We have our assistant superintendent of human resources assisting us. We have our Title IX coordinator, who is the director of student support services at the district. We have myself, my athletic director, and my assistant principal who oversees activities in athletics. So this is not a feat that is just taken on by one individual. It truly is a team. And in terms of the day-to-day of things, there's 11 things that we try to make a conscious effort to look at. As was stated earlier, equipment and supplies, we're looking at, is there equity with that? What is the quality of the equipment and supplies? What is the amount? Is it suitable? Is it maintained? Is it available? Scheduling games and practices. How many of these games are competitive events? What is the number of them? Are they equitable? What's the length? Who's traveling where? Is it always the girls traveling out and the boys are staying on campus? These are all things that we look at. We look at travel. Opportunities to receive coaching and academic tutoring are also things that we consider. Well, oftentimes we have students who are athletes leave early, and we have and provide after-school tutoring. We need to remember that those athletes are not going to get that after-school tutoring, so we have to put some things in place to help circumvent that. In regards to coaching opportunities, we look to basically ensure that all the best coaches are hired. It's equitable, that we have the appropriate amount of full-time coaches, part-time coaches, and we don't lean one way or another depending on the sport or the gender of that sport. We also look at the assignment and compensation of both the coaches and the tutors. Again, locker rooms, practice rooms, competitive facilities, the quality, the availability, the upkeep, the maintenance of that, all those things we need to look at on a day-to-day basis. We look at the medical and training facilities, housing and dining is something that should be looked at more so at the collegiate level than us. We look at the publicity. Are we doing everything to attract the best coaches possible? And we look at support services that we have for students. So overall, when we look at these 11 factors, we look at where is the disparity? Is there a disparity? Does it exist? And if so, what are we doing about it? We need to, again, always get ahead and be at the forefront. So what obstacles do we face in complying? I'd say the overall obstacle, given that my campus is a campus of about 3,000 students, we have about 1,100 athletes, about 500 female athletes, about 600 male athletes approximately. We're a large school. Our time is divided. I might have an assistant principal. I have 3 assistant principals. One is we're in an IEP meeting. One is working on a discipline. Another one may be doing some work with just investigating a harassment case or a bullying case. And so when you have 3 out, you have 1 more administrator left that's there to do fielding the calls of parents, meeting the needs of students, doing walkthroughs, and doing the other daily things that we are asked to do as administrators. So I would say that is the biggest obstacle, is time and resources. If there could be a way that we would have some type of additional funding for perhaps a district full-time Title IX coordinator, I do think that that would certainly be helpful. I know it was asked also in terms of an enforcement mechanism. I think it would be wise to encourage institutions of higher education to encourage them to include Title IX, the whole concept of Title IX and how to enforce it, what is it, and so forth, as part of the curriculum and training administrators. That's something that can easily be done. It can be added into a couple of sessions of their schooling, and that would help tremendously. I can say that for me, I am not an expert. I'm learning day by day. I know as a female, that was a cheerleader. I didn't do sports, but that to me was a sport. So with that being said, I recognize the importance of this. However, had I not walked into a school and inherited a Title IX situation on our campus, several years ago, there was a talk about eliminating our girls' softball program. And as you know, and the reason why was because we were the only program in the league that offered it at the freshman level. So that's what we were discussing to eliminate. We also thought we were being good stewards of our money. We would save about $10,000 on transportation. However, what was not taken into consideration at the time is the fact that Title IX, you're looking at the equity issue. There was a strong desire, and the community really wanted to keep that freshman softball team alive. And so with that, I would not be as knowledgeable, quite honestly, with Title IX and the intricacies of the methodologies, the surveys, and the implementation, creating logs and so forth, had I not sat in the seat of a school that has been in noncompliance. So overall, is there a need? Absolutely, there is absolutely a need, and I do think that some additional funding, again, for a Title IX coordinator at each district would be ideal. And again, encouraging institutions of higher education to include that in their schooling. Those two things would help.